So yeah, we're going to kick off with our next panel, which is the great data debate. How do we overcome the industry's data challenges? And I feel like we just touched on some of these issues already in our earlier panel. So I'm going to hand it over to Vickie when she gets here.
My name is Vickie Nauman, and I'm the founder and CEO of CrossBorderWorks. I'm very excited to have this group of people together to talk about some of the challenges with synchronization, with licensing, with data, and making sure that we are accurately securing rights and being able to pay them. I have a really stellar group, and what I like about everyone in this discussion is people are coming at it from very different angles and perspectives. So I'll just do some very quick introductions and then we'll get into it. So we've got Niels Rump from DDEX. And as you may know, DDEX is the standard on the supply chain side, and we're going to talk a little bit about standards today. But he is the main author of most of the DDEX standards work. And thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
We also have Debbie Rose, who's the president of Kokopelli Creative Music Publishing, and she has been in the industry at some of the earliest stages of digitizing and taking things from what I like to call recipe cards in a shoebox into the world of big data, and has been very active in the space of modernizing the publishing sector. So thank you for being here, Debbie.
Thank you for having me.
And Richard Thompson, who's the CIO of the MLC. And probably everyone here knows what the MLC is, but I'll just say it's the Mechanical Licensing Collective that was established as a part of the Music Modernization Act in the US. And he is really overseeing a very big task of pooling all of the Section 115 interactive streaming mechanical publishing into one entity, and making sense of all of that and paying people out. And you guys just did your first Q1 payments, so congratulations on that.
January payment, we distribute monthly. So yeah, February's is coming on Friday.
It's amazing. And then we have Jarrett Hines, who I met, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago, and entrepreneur, the founder of Music Tech Works, and is going through the accelerator program in Los Angeles right now, and is also the first product that they're really launching is called RightsHolderIO.io, which is an aggregation of all of the world's data around music. Not an insignificant task. So we've got entrepreneurs, we've got technologists, we have publishers, and we have standards here. And these are all the different ingredients that we need to have a good discussion about music and data. So let's get right into it. One of the plagues of the music industry has always been in the transition from the physical world into digital, and that we had credits and copyrights and things embedded in a print package, and now we're in a digital world where we need to be able to pay in a machine readable world. We have exponentially more songs that are being released every day than we ever did in the previous era. I think we have 60,000 songs that are being uploaded to Spotify every day, and 60 million plus in any service. And then you have publishing splits, and so the data points that you have are in the hundreds of millions of matching everything and linking everything up between sound recordings and underlying publishing. This is a very big problem, and it's probably, I would imagine that we'll see today, it's a combination of human problems and technology problems, and at the center of it is really standardization. And Niels, I'd love to hear from you first on this, because I think that the the sound recording side of the business went through a major evolution probably 10, 15 years ago of cleaning up all of their data and adhering to DDEX standards. And we're in the process, we're in, some level of this with the publishing, but Niels, perhaps you could talk a little bit about that era and what it was like before, and then when DDEX came in and started to standardize the master recording side.
Well, just the numbers that you've just mentioned means that we cannot rely on human people dealing with the data. It has to be done by computers, and it has to be automated. And if you want to automate something in a web of companies with a web of computers, you need to have standards. Otherwise, if one person stores the data in one format, another company stores it in another format, and they want to exchange information, you have to have one way of doing that, unless you want everybody to have proprietary formats with everybody. But that is simply not sustainable. So standardization is one part of the puzzle, if you like. DDEX itself produces standards for the supply and value chain. And while you said what you said is correct, that most likely we're best known for the ERN standard, the electronic release notification, the product feed. We do have standards that actually cover the entire value chain. That starts from collecting information in the studio. Who was actually at a session? Who wrote the song? Who recorded the song? Who was the engineer? Where has the whole thing happened? All of that kind of information needs to be collected, needs to be in a readable form communicated to record companies, to other collective rights management organizations, for example. They can then take that information. We have standards for musical work, notification, licensing, letters of direction. Those kind of processes are all supported by DDEX standards. So we have standards for quite a broad spectrum of business functions. It doesn't cover everything yet, but it covers a great deal. I think there are two things where the use of standards is actually not quite there yet. The first is conformance. The music industry is really great at developing standards and really crap at actually adhering to those standards. So to some extent, all of these standards need to have a little bit of wiggle room, because the music industry, a creative industry, they come up with new ways of creating products, describing products, marketing products. But if the standards want to support these things, they need to have a little bit of wiggle room. And then people start abusing that wiggle room, and two companies using the same standard still can't communicate. So we're constantly trying to make sure that we have the right profiles. If it's a classical release, that's the way you do it, and those kind of things. But the standards exist. They just need to be used more, especially on the publishing side. You're right, mainly the ERN. And the sales usage reporting for musical works is also quite widely used. So the ERN and the DSR, I think, are the two standards.
So thank you, Niels. So Richard, just going to you on this, setting up the Mechanical Licensing Collective, where you are running on the Harry Fox system on the back end, but you're trying to build out pipelines, portals where there's two-way data exchanges. Tell me a little bit about what your work involves at the MLC, because I feel like, this is really the first time that there has been a mandate for publicly accessible data in the publishing world. And so ideally we want that data to be as accurate as possible. And I know that that's a big step, but tell everyone a little bit about your work at the MLC.
Sure. Where to start on that? I mean, firstly, you know, I think let me say it in many ways it's still very early days for us. You know, since we were designated in the summer of 2019, you know, we have had to stand up a completely new CMO in the world's largest music market. And, you know, we've had to do that on a pretty ambitious timetable. And, you know, in the middle of a global pandemic. So it's been a ride. I think it's fair to say for not quite the last 2 years since we were designated, but approaching that. So, you know, I would say as a consequence of that, you know, we've done in many cases the first version of something. So, you know, the first version of the portal, for example, the first version of the data that we make available publicly actually in a DDEX standard, the first version of our public search interface. And, you know, while we are very pleased with the work we've been able to do so far, our ambition for where we need to get it to is still very, very much higher. In terms of the fact that you know, we need to get these first versions out. As we've done, you know, people then use them, interact with them, they tell us what's wrong with them, they tell us how they can be improved, they tell us what more we can do, they tell us what more data they want. And, you know, that there is so much more to come in terms of, you know, the tools and the facilities we intend to offer. You know, both around the standardization stuff. So, you know, as I say, all of our data is publicly available in a DDEX standard. We've done the first version of that standard so far, and we are already receiving feedback on extra things that people would like, or, you know, can you add this? Can you do that? So you know, more to come there. Similarly with the public search interface, you know, there's a lot of improvements that can be made to that, and will be made to that. In small increments, you know, I mean, you know, we do a new release of the portal, for example, or of the public search interface, typically every week or every other week. And often it's just small increments, so you don't necessarily sort of see it happen in real time, but when you look back over a month or 2 months or a 3-month period, you can actually sort of see the great progress that we've made. And since you mentioned the public data, I mean, you know, just one other thing that I will mention on that is actually how exciting that is. I think that there is a now publicly accessible source of all of this information for you know, its scope is limited to the United States, excuse me, and its scope is limited to digital audio mechanicals. But there is now, for the first time, that repository of data that is available to everybody, and by law we are required to make it available to everybody for a nominal fee. And the really exciting thing about that is actually how we're starting to see people use that data already. And I wouldn't for a second claim to have full visibility of how people are using that data. But we do, you know, based upon the feedback we get and the questions we get, and also sort of just the, you know, anecdotal things that I hear, there are people doing new and exciting things with that data that I couldn't have conceived of. And I don't think anybody could perhaps have conceived on when the requirement was put into the law that created the MLC. So I actually think it's a fantastic Kickstarter and a fantastic opportunity for people to create new businesses, create new services, new opportunities on the back of that data. And that I think is definitely something that's going to be exciting to watch in the coming months. How people continue to interact and use that. But yeah, much more to come as we move forward.
Well, that's great, and I do feel like you know, I work with a lot of licensees who are interested in doing things with music, but they're scared off because of the unknowns, the risks, the legal issues, all of the things about our industry that can't just be boiled down to into a spreadsheet of data. And so there's risk and there's uncertainty, and a lot of that can start to be mitigated through data and through transparency. Jarrett, you have built a business around aggregation of data. Can you talk a little bit about RightsHolder.io and you know, how you are amassing data and the use cases that you see for it?
Oh, absolutely. And to Richard's point, we are one of those companies that ingest your data from the MLC and use that as well as a number of sources. I believe at this point we are numbering in the dozens of sources that we pull rights ownership information together on the master, publishing, and past use data. And we run a number of different algorithms in the background to kind of match that, to know that Kanye West is the same as K West is the same as West Kanye. To Niels' point earlier, that there are so many different standards that individual companies are using that you have to have that translation between them, and we're trying to get away from that. So we've kind of automated a lot of that translation and verifying it against a number of different data points in scoring it and ranking it and so on and so forth. But the end goal is not to just have better data, but what better data gets us, right? If I can, instead of spending 30 minutes or an hour researching, 5 or 10 songs, going through a number of different sites to figure out who owns what, and then trying to validate that, if I can spend 5 minutes doing that, then I can make a licensing decision a lot faster. And I can say, hey, this song's been licensed before, which is awesome. So I know that they've gone through the process, and I have a better chance of getting a license for it, potentially for what I need my video production, whether it be TV, film, advertising, or whatnot. And it just gives you a lot more visibility and, like you said, transparency going into it, and more confident that you can get what you need at the end result for the creators, which is they want to have a license. They want to make sure that they're paying whoever they need to pay, and that they're not going to face, unknown liability on the other side of things. So we try and provide that first step to get them there, to tell them who owns what, so that they can go ahead and then do that. One of the other things that has come up very recently is we've talked to a number of tech companies that, like you said, want to use music and don't know how to jump into it right away. But they've looked to see if we can provide them some data so that they can go out and license catalogs and unlock parts of their product roadmap that before are sitting stalled because, again, at bulk or at scale, they don't know who to talk to. And so we can say, all right, you want these 1,000 songs, we can tell you very quickly, based on the information we have today, who we believe owns it, and then allow them to go off and, have those conversations and be able to move forward and move their product roadmap forward and test new things and bring things out to market.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I do a lot of synchronization licensing. And so I used to do mostly broad-based licensing, where you go and you're licensing Warner and Sony and Universal and Cobalt and Warner Chappell and UMPG, and then you put it all together and you have a set of rights. And in synchronization licensing, it's really the opposite, where you're going in and doing song by song. And it wasn't really until I started doing the sync licensing that I also saw how quickly and how common it is for rights to change hands. And then there's a big lag between when that data is reflected. And Debbie, maybe you can talk a little bit about this from a publisher's standpoint of what are some of those challenges, including rights being bought and sold, but just the constant living, breathing nature of publishing data. Why is it such a challenge?
Well, that is a very long topic. There's so many mitigating factors when it goes to data that, so for example, a song might look fairly straightforward. However, a new publisher has taken over the rights. The rights have expired. It's gone to a new publisher, but the old publisher might still control the rights for a certain period of time. So it looks like one thing, but it's actually another thing. The truth about publishing is that it is all contract based. And so it's whatever a contract says, and contracts are not standardized. And that leads to like having a million different layers of what things could be. That being said, trying to deal with the challenges, and as publishers, we all want the data to be cleaner. We all want it to be easier to change rights, assert rights, relinquish rights even. I've been working for many years on many different CISAC committees dealing with standardizing an IPI, the ISWC. I'm now dealing with the music and commercials and the Q sheet harmonization, and all of these initiatives are to, you know, how do we communicate better? How can we get the information so everybody is, as I say, singing from the same hymn sheet? And that's a lot of the challenge.
Well, and I think you're also addressing just some of the realities of how people create also, is that, people collaborate, they have non-standard contracts, things make sense at the time, and then we're trying to squeeze all of that into database fields. And
well, and frankly, collaboration now is even in a certain way more complicated than ever, because we're doing this, we're doing Zoom, we're on a digital means. You know, it used to be that songwriters would get into a room together and write a song, and it was fairly, you know, it's like, okay, two writers, one's doing music, like it was very clean. Now I have writers who are writing a beat while they're, you know, on an airplane someplace, and they send it to another group of people, and he doesn't even know who those people are. He might know one of the guys, but he doesn't know the other four people who they pulled in. So just trying to figure out who did what, whose contributions were a part of it, is a really complicated issue. But
yeah, and I think we now have on average eight songwriters per song that's being released, something along those lines. So that's
yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. I blame we're all in the same gang, and I don't know if you guys remember that. It was a hit many years ago when I was at ASCAP, and I noticed that there was 23 writers and publishers attached to the song, and it was like the R&B song of the year, and all I could think about, this is great, nobody made anything, you know, because when you're dividing the pie into that kind of into 23rds, I mean, it's kind of crazy, but you know, that's what we're dealing with every day.
The lawyers will have made money out of that. But it's, I think, critical that that kind of information, if you're dealing with that kind of complexity, and we are dealing with that kind of complexity, you need to make sure that the data is being collected right at the start, because otherwise it's the age-old garbage in, garbage out principle. If you don't have the right people right from the start, you have no chance. The best database, the best standards will not help you to sort things out. So yeah, that's one of the crucial aspects here.
well, and I think that I think when we think about the best possible use case, if we have clean and accurate data, then if there are 23 writers on a song and that song blows up, and if you even have 1%, that can be really meaningful to an individual writer. And we should have the capability to be able to get money passing through to those really small shareholders, because in aggregate with music publishing, there's 500 to 600 income streams for any composition globally. If you have a percentage of all of those, it adds up, and I feel like it is incumbent upon us, of all these people that are in the middle in our industry, to accommodate the way people are creating.
It's not a technology issue, actually. The technology is comparatively simple. Yes, there are huge webs of data that needs to be managed. But the DDEX standards have shown it can be done. Jarrett's company shows that it can be done. The MLC shows it can be done. But we need to make sure that we have the right data, that we have the right mindset in all the different places, to make sure that the correct data is available and authoritatively agreed upon the rest is, well, it's not child play. That would be slightly over egging it, but it's comparatively simple.
I
I mean,
fully agree.
I was,
Go ahead, Richard.
well, I was just going to sort of build on Niels's access point, because I don't know if this is where he was going, but within the publishing industry, really, there are really two major identification standards that we rely on: IPI for creators and publishers, and ISWC for the works. I will just note ISNI, of course, as well on the party identification side. But I mean, to Niels's access point, that we have a challenge with both IPI and ISWC insofar as they are not anywhere near as freely available or resolvable as I think any of us on the technology side would like. You know, IPI is an identifier that has been obviously created by CSAC. As far as in my 20-odd years of experience, it's a pretty high quality identifier. They're generally very, very reliable, they're very good, but they're not the most easy things to get hold of. And if you are, other than certain categories of entity within the industry, you have no access to them, other than perhaps to go on the MLC or ASCAP or BMI website and try to look them up one at a time. That clearly isn't scalable. So, on the IPI side, at least, there is a real challenge with access. ISNI, however, looks much more promising in that regard, insofar as there is an open database where you can go and look them up. And I believe that there are, ways to be able to do bulk resolution of ISNIs. So, one of the questions in the Q&A was about ISNI. So, certainly I think ISNI is very slowly, I think, picking up some steam within the industry, and I think that could definitely be a very promising direction of travel. And also to Jarrett's earlier point, in terms of where you have multiple spellings of Kanye West and K West and what have you as well. ISNI is to some extent able, I think, to help with that challenge. I mean, and then similarly in the ISWC challenge, aside the same challenge exists. So unless you are a certain category of player within the industry, there is no way to get hold of ISNIs. Sorry, I'm not helping myself here, am I? ISWCs en masse. So the allocation rules for ISWC are quite tough, and no resolution service exists for them. So you can't. It is challenging to do rights management without identity management. Right. And the identity layer sits below the rights management layer, and where the identity layer is made so much more difficult by the lack of access to these identifiers on which we all rely, the job on the publishing side is made very much more difficult.
In addition, ISWC is, of course, allocated well after the fact that the recording is being written. So it's not available at the beginning. So the first metadata, even if you're in the studio and you're collecting all the information, you cannot provide a permanent work identifier, at least not ISWC. You can use proprietary identifiers, which works, but is always, it's second best.
And Debbie, you had started to say something. I want to go back to you. And I think we're starting to get lots of questions, which is great.
I love that I was trying to say something, but by this point,
sorry, Debbie.
Oh no, that's all right. It's my fleeting brain, and I apologize for that. I'm just saying that I think what my point might have been is that about getting good data. All publishers, we all want to know what the splits are. We all want to be able to register something once and not have to register it twice or 3 times once we find out that, oh, there's another player involved. I've accepted it to some degree that, I work with great artists, and sometimes it's just, trying to figure this out before they actually, get the song done is just there. And it creates problems all down the food chain, and we recognize it. I don't know what the solution is. I mean, I have serviced more split sheets than any person in the planet. How many of them actually ever get returned is, like on one hand. But we do, like, as publishers, like I understand from the data side, it's like, oh, we're getting all that. It's like, yeah, but we are too. Like, we would love to give perfect data every time. And oftentimes when we're delivering data, we think it's perfect. And then we find out that they gave 5% to the guy who delivered the pizza and nobody knows his name, and we have to deal with that.
Right. There's a lot of chatter in here about blockchain, and I think that I'd love to throw this out to the group, because there's a number of questions about where does blockchain fit into this, and I think that just from my perspective, we have we have all sorts of issues in this industry around transparency and who owns what and what are the percentage and splits of every single song. We have issues around data being clean, where the permanence of data in a blockchain seems to like it would be really useful, but there's friction there around levels of transparency and what does this group think about kind of the transparency issue and the data permanence issue, and then further blockchain? Any comments about whether blockchain is something that we need, or are the bigger issues the transparency and human problems?
Blockchain is a technology, like an Oracle database is a piece of technology. If you want to use those technologies, or let's do it the other way around, you need to see what is your requirement, and then you look for the technology that fits. There may very well be a role for blockchain in all of this. Transparency may be one of those things. On the other hand, if there's wrong information, it will also stay forever in the blockchain. So you would then need to make sure that everybody always uses the latest information. So it's not fail-safe from that perspective. But to be honest, I think blockchain is a bit of a red herring. We need to see that what are the requirements, try to find the appropriate solutions, technical as well as human and business, to solve those issues.
And Jarrett and Richard, as two technologists here, what are your thoughts about blockchain?
What Niels said.
Echo. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say
what Niels
said.
As a technologist, you don't say I have a problem to solve. How can I apply this? You say I have a problem to solve. What is the best tool set to help me meet that problem? So there may very well be a use case or use cases to which blockchain is the best solution. Time will tell.
Well,
sorry, Jarrett.
Oh, no problem. I was going to say what Debbie said a little bit earlier, right before this, about not knowing the splits or having to change splits or go back and re-register things, to me is a major blocker for using blockchain, because you'll have things that are, again, permanently wrong. And the vast majority of songs that do get sync placement get them on average 2 years or later in their lifespan. And the reason is because those splits don't always get figured out until, a year or two, 18 months down the line. And then once they're paid out successfully, people then feel confident that, okay, now we can go and use it, and everybody's been identified. And there's plenty of cases where it's been longer than that, as we see, but it becomes very expensive to do all that error correction in blockchain also, and try and fix things and just say, we're gonna put everything down and then we're gonna clean it up there. It's not a really useful tool for that. And so I do agree with Niels, is that we have to figure out the people problem. How do we get the data correct as close to the source and as early on as possible? And then how we store it moving forward and transact on it, that may be opportunity there. But right now, I'm not sure that it's the best solution for this problem.
And there's some really great questions in here about identifiers, and I think that we've kind of gone through this evolution where even back in the early days on the master recording side, we had ISRCs, which are the unique identifiers for the sound recording. We had labels using them differently in the early days, where we had labels assigning assigning them in a way that was completely inconsistent with others. You know, different. There was one label that would have a different ISRC for, you know, a different bit rates of music, and so we've gotten to the point with ISRCs. There's agents, they are readily assignable, they're able to be, you know, permanently created by the producers and assigned by distributors for independent artists, so that we've got a proliferation of ISRCs. ISWCs, on the other hand, seem like once they're actually assigned and once it has been associated with all the right splits and the contributors, it's very accurate, but there's a lag there. Can, you know, maybe, you know, just to ask the group, what are your thoughts about all of these identifiers, and is ISWC the lag, is that causing additional problems, or is it a deterrent for people to actually adopt and use ISWCs just simply because of that?
Can we go one step back and look at ISRC for a very quick moment? Yes, it's absolutely ubiquitous today, but only since one of the big DSPs said about 10, 15 years ago, every single song that comes into my store will have an ISRC, or I will not put it up. And since they were and are quite prominent, that forced basically everybody's hand. But also the yes, you had different rules of how different companies allocated them, but the IFPI has over the years worked with the handbook and started to narrow down the wiggle room that I talked about at the beginning about DDEX. ISWC doesn't have that problem, but it has the problem that Richard outlined earlier, that it's not that readily available, that it's later in the game. And it's allocated not by the writer, not by the publisher, but by the society that the writer or the publisher is a member of. And there is a gap there. I think we need to find something to fill that gap, whether that's ISWC or whether that's a preliminary identifier that then gets replaced, because the quality of the ISWC is very, very good because they have so high rules before something gets allocated. That's a good thing, and it's a bad thing.
And CISAC is working on trying to speed this up.
They have programs to allocate them, and the allocation is now, it's a 24-hour turnaround cycle now. It still is 24 hours from when I write this stuff, and I have my recording done, and I've rendered it on YouTube, and I've published it on YouTube, and it's now out there, and I still don't have an identifier for it. So there is a lag that is an issue that needs to be addressed. Again, whether it's ISWC that needs to address that, or whether we need to find something in between. Like we do on the recording side, we don't have a proper identifier for a stem. Those things becoming more and more productized, and we need to think about, hey, what do we do about those things? Do we need, is ISRC the right thing? Do we need an extension to ISRC? Do we need a stem? I don't know. Something like that is I think needed on both sides.
And Debbie, do you have any thoughts about on the creator side of create? You know, I think with the, you know, Niels brings up a really good point. What was the incentive for everyone to get their identifiers on the master recording side? It was because one of the big DSPs said, we're not ingesting your music without this. I think with creators, really on publishing, you know, well, how can we create more awareness of the importance of figuring out your splits when you're in the studio and getting your identifiers and getting things registered as quickly as possible?
I wish I knew the answer to that, you know, because the challenge is there. I mean, we try to always work proactively. In fact, like I have a writer artist. I see there's a very big international community on here. Canadian, very talented guy who's dropping one of the 60,000 songs tomorrow. If anybody wants to see the video, I'll post my stuff in the chat and I'll send it to you today. But you know, with him, I was really lucky because I knew in advance that the record is dropping tomorrow, and therefore I could have everything in place before. Like, that is optimal. That is the publisher dream, is to get all the registrations in, get the ISWCs assigned, make sure it's attached to the IRC, like do it all before. Often, as a songwriter, especially if you're a songwriter who is not the artist, you don't have that luxury. You don't have that ability to control or even know that something that you wrote, you know, 7 months ago is now being recorded and released, and you're finding out after the fact, and you're just rushing to pay catch up. And I don't really know another way around it. It is, you know, it's not even chicken and egg. It's just, it's so difficult to keep everybody in the loop every step of the way, to let them know, to give them a chance, because you know, people are creative, like, we're going to do this, we're going to drop it, we're going to put it out, and we'll put it up tomorrow. And it's like, wait a second, we didn't see this coming. And so now we have no other choice.
And I've also, I had a conversation a year or so ago with a group of artists, and I was asking them about this, about, you know, how do you figure out splits? How do you know, when do you broach that topic, when you're in the writing room or when you're in the studio? And one of them said, you know, I don't do any of that. I just wait to see if the song's going to be a hit. And if it's a hit, I'll figure it out later. And I thought, well, that is, if your song is a hit, that's the last thing you have on your mind, is going back and figuring out splits. If your song's a hit, you're doing interviews, and you're probably engaging with people around sync and different opportunities in streaming, and so there it feels to me like there's education that needs to happen all throughout the value chain on the publishing side, from the creators to the publishers, publishing administrators, PROs, that are societies that are assigning these, that there's revenues that are lost when we don't have identifiers, and there's people that get paid inaccurately or not at all. But it's a little bit of everyone has to have their part of it. Someone in the chat was asking, should there be the same kind of requirement for ISWCs at the DSP level, of DSPs saying, until we have all of those unique identifiers with publishing, that the song can't be made available. I think that's kind of a controversial one, but what are your thoughts on that?
I'd say that's I think it's unfair and pretty difficult to do, right? If you think about the long tail, or what people are calling it long tail, but more and more independent artists, songwriters are charting and creating music that is getting out there to the world and being successful in it. And the five of us can, write a song today, as Neil said, put it out, go to the DistroKid, get it distributed in the store, in the DSPs tomorrow, and it can start earning revenue. And nowhere along the line has anybody asked us for that information, to say, they'll do the ISRC and give it to you, but they won't ask who owns the publishing, who are the writers, what are the splits, and so on and so forth. And with a lot of the independent artists, they don't have an idea of what that means all the way. So then some have publishing companies, some don't. Some have IPIs because they're registered with a society, some don't. And some of them, frankly, aren't really concerned with it. They want to do it later, or they say, hey, I'm going to make the money, kind of pre-pandemic on touring. So I'm not even worried about streaming or any of that stuff. I just want to get it out there so that I can book this show next week. So it's hard to force people to do things like that if we don't have the education and other stuff ahead of time, to really, empower them and make it easy for them to get those.
Make it easy. Making it easy. I think,
yeah,
Jarrett.
frankly, it was always our dream. Like, if any of the services, if YouTube, if Spotify, if anybody just gave us 24 hours to say, hey, we were served this, we think it's yours, can you put a claim on, just, you know, give us like a slight heads up, that would have been amazing. But it's never, you know, unfortunately, songwriters have always been like last on the food chain as far as being taken care of, which is why we're here. But, you know, but all you can do is try.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a few years ago, I was talking to Brian Message, who's Radiohead's manager, and I asked him on a panel, I asked the same question of saying, should we hold back new releases until they have everything sorted out with ISWCs and the identifiers and splits? And he said if I said that, my bands would immediately try to find a new manager. So we have pressure points throughout the value chain to get music out as quickly as possible in DSPs, and, you know, like, yes, we've just finished it, we're going to drop it now, we want to put it out, and we'll figure out publishing later. And that's kind of the world that we're in right now. But I am hopeful through education, and when we see things like $424 million in unattributed revenues in the US, only under Section 115, one territory, $424 million. Those are publishing splits that are unattributed, and nobody knows who to pay, and we don't have data. And that's, you know, for people who say there's not enough money to be an incentive, I think $424 million is not it's not too bad.
I'll take it.
I'll take it. Exactly. I think we're getting to the end of our time. If there's, I'll just kind of take a spin through this. Doesn't look like there's any real pressing questions. Maybe we could just do a quick round, and you think about something positive that, where I feel like there is a lot of progress being made in this world of cleaning up data, and I don't want to leave the viewers with negative impressions. So maybe we could just, you know, go around and maybe start with you, Jarrett, of you know, you're building a business around cleaning up data. So what are some positive things that you're seeing about this problem being addressed in our industry?
Well, with the rights holders, both large and small, I've seen a huge shift in the willingness to share data, both with us and across the board with each other, to say, hey, you know, I only have a small sliver, or my worldview is of my catalog, not necessarily of all the other co-publishers that are also, or joint owners on that catalog. But they're now willing to open up, kind of, or pull back the curtain and say, okay, here's what I own, what do you own, and so on and so forth. Because before, they thought that information was competitive. You know, if I tell you how much I own, then for whatever reason, that's proprietary to me, and that may give you some advantage in competing. But now they're seeing that it's more value to work together and to get that information out there and to make sure that information is correct. And so that's been something I've been exposed to a lot. We're going, like you mentioned earlier, we're going through Techstars Music, and all of our conversations there have been about, yes, we're open to sharing data. Here's what we send to these groups. Let's talk about, you know, what you guys need, and what data points are relevant to you to have that discussion.
Great. And Richard?
Jarrett's rather stolen my thunder. I think what he says, I mean, I think I think we've seen it, you know, in the early days of the MLC, where our data is now public, and we see people are looking at that data for the first time, and sometimes they're happy with what they see, and okay, you know, sometimes they're not always happy with what they see, and they contact us and say, well, can you fix it? And we go, great, yeah, absolutely, we will fix it. But it's only been possible because they've been able to look at it for the first time. Yeah, you know, I think that is a very positive trend, and one that I am certain will continue as we move forward.
And Debbie?
Sorry, New York City keeps going by with the sirens, so I keep turning off my mute. You know, I've been at this for a very long time, and I've had the pleasure of working directly with 28 societies around the world. And I can tell you it is so much better now than what it used to be. That for all that we're complaining about how, you know, the ISWC might be slow, you know, just the fact that they're now IPI numbers, that they're ISWC numbers, that we can attach this to something that goes globally and people will be able to find the song regardless of how they spell it. You know, we're making huge strides and huge improvements, and I think just more is coming. I mean, the cue sheet harmonization and the you know, the ad sheet that's coming out, it's going to make a big difference for all of us. So, you know, that's exciting, and you know, what the MLC is doing is exciting. And here goes New York again, so I'm going to mute again.
They're coming to get you, Deb. And Niels, final words from you about positive change that you're seeing in this space.
I see, we can all work together if we collect the data as early as possible and we share it with other people that have a legitimate interest in it. Holding the data back is a stupid idea, in my view. Sharing it with others so that everybody actually has the information to make the right decisions to do that. And sharing means using standards, of course, DDEX standards, naturally.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who's in the audience and for the vibrant chat and questions, and we didn't even have to apologize for using acronyms in this, because it looked like we have a lot of really a lot of very informed participants. And Emma, thank you so much for hosting this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vickie. You did such a great job moderating that session, and thank you to all the panelists as well. So yeah, that's great. So we're going to move on.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, bye guys. Thank you.